Welcome to Aspire to Lead, where we empower educators and school leaders to grow, inspire, and thrive. I'm your host, Joshua Stamper, author, speaker, and leadership coach, bringing you conversations that spark transformation, challenge the status quo in education, and equip you to making a lasting impact on your campus or in your district. For more information and resources, visit joshstamper.com as we're looking to ascend to new leadership heights together. All right, welcome back to Aspire to Lead. I have a wonderful guest, someone who I just connected with. And I will say that if I'm thinking of highlights at North Carolina, the NCMLE conference, it was sitting in the airport having lunch with my guest, Dr. Brandi Kelly, and getting to learn more about her story, all the wonderful things that she's doing in education. And I'm just so grateful that she's joining me, not only for the bonus episode, which just dropped, but also for this longer conversation. So with that, Brandi, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Well, Josh, the feeling was mutual. You definitely were the highlight of my time, my 7 or 8 hours in the airport in North Carolina. So get you as well. And thank you for having me on the show today.
You bet. I have behind me, for the YouTube audience, Dr. Brandi Kelly's book behind me, and she's doing awesome work. And we're going to talk about not only this book, but some new resources and new fun projects that are going on in Brandi's world. And I know she's making a huge impact. So we're going to talk about a couple things later in the podcast. So stay tuned for that. But before we do that, we had talked in the bonus. I want everyone to go back and listen because we have some great guests from speakers that were at that wonderful conference, NCMLE. Brandi, though, talked about her book. And I think that's a great place to start, Brandi, because we only had maybe 8 minutes or so, maybe 10 of talking time. And we were on the conference floor, and you shared a little bit about this resource. You also shared about what you were speaking on. Mm-hmm. But your book, Lead with Hope, is rooted in your own journey. And that journey, unfortunately, has some tragedy. Yeah. And you are overcoming that, some resilience in that also in that story. And I would love for you just to share a little bit about how that shaped the way that you now lead and support others.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I set out to write this book, I had no idea the impact it would have on my life. And it's coming up on its first birthday. We released this book last year in May. So coming up on our first birthday for Lead with Hope. But it all started when I started blogging, actually, with Teach Better. And I wrote a 4-part series on leading with hope. And I unpacked the pillars of hope: habits, optimistic outlook. That's that mindset piece, which is huge. Everything starts in the mind. And then my P is purpose, passion, and perseverance. And that gets you to excellence. And for me, excellence is just getting 1% better each and every day. But the reason that I wrote the book was I was leading a new school building in the midst of COVID. The world shut down in March of 2020, and I got an opportunity to go from a primary building to a middle school. And I love middle school kids, always have. And so as I was leading during that time, my goal was to help not just myself, but the people that I was leading to lead with hope. And so I came across the Teach Better Network. I was invited to write that blog. And that was really the origin of this journey that I'm on. And so fast forward, my kids are both grown. And I got an opportunity to come closer to home because they were talking about having a family. And there was a superintendent job here in Mount Olive, Illinois. And I applied for it. I got the job. I signed a contract with Darren Peppard, Road to Awesome, to write this book. And as I was editing the book in May of 2025, I was having some health issues. Didn't really know why. I was going to the doctor. He was running tests. He was sharing with me a story about his wife, who was also a high achiever, really running on empty for a long time. And she had just quit her job. And so his recommendation for me was to step away from the stress. And Joshua, we've talked for several hours at this point. So that for me, that was very difficult. I had a hard time making that decision. But what informed that decision for me was what happened to my mother. My mother dealt with a lot of stress. She was an entrepreneur. She had her own business. She had several businesses. And in 1999, and I talk about this in my book, she was diagnosed, actually 1998, she was diagnosed with cancer. And that mindset piece plays such a huge role. The doctors gave her 6 months to live, and she lost hope. It wasn't until she found a glimmer of hope again that she was able to fight. But unfortunately, her story was that she didn't make it. She died of cancer. When the doctor told me I needed to take away the stress in my life and to really focus on my own healing, I had a flashback of my mom's story. I had an opportunity to do something different for myself and for my family and for my legacy. And so I stepped away, and I didn't know at that point in time if I'd go back to the superintendency or not, but I made the decision after stepping away and focusing on my health to not go back and to build this business, Spark Hope EDU. And now I'm loving it, absolutely loving it. Wish I would have done it earlier. If I have any regrets, it was that I didn't do this earlier. But I'm speaking, I'm coaching, and I'm working with school districts in a different capacity to help them lead with hope, to combat all of the stresses, the recruitment and retainment issues that we're dealing with in schools, and to really focus on cultivating a culture where people feel seen and valued, heard. We need to remember that our work is really important, but we have to treat our people better, and we have to take care of them.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk about self-awareness. It seems to be a major thread, not only in your own life, obviously through the journey that you just spoke about, but also it's a thread in your work. So why is self-awareness such a critical starting point for our leaders who want to grow through adversity?
Right. Self-awareness is something that we don't teach our kids enough in school. It's something that I really didn't learn to do well until I was in my 40s. And self-awareness, about 70 to 80% of people think that they're self-aware, but in reality, about 10 to 15% of people are truly self-aware. And self-awareness is so important, Josh, because we have to know what's on the inside. We have to know our fears, our motivations, our blind spots, our triggers, because everything we do comes from the heart. There's a scripture that I love, and it says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that is so true. Everything comes from the heart. And so if we spend some time doing things like reflection, just notching out a little bit of time every day to reflect on our intentions, how the day went, how we want tomorrow to go, and be intentional with that and align that to our values, our vision, and our mission, I believe that we can cultivate that excellence that I talk about in my book. And when I first started on this journey of self-awareness, I did a test called the Enneagram. It's a free test. It's if you Google free Enneagram test, there's a number of options that are going to come up. I'm a type 3. I'm an achiever. One of my biggest fears is a fear of failure. And it's not that self-awareness puts you in a box. Those typologies or those descriptors, they don't put you in a box. They just help you to see what your default setting is. And then you get to make the choice on how you take that next step forward. Since that time, I have joined John Maxwell's leadership group, and I'm a certified coach and consultant, and I do the DISC assessment. Love the DISC assessment. There are 4 categories, DISC. And when you do those assessments, there are comprehensive reports that go with that to help you to see who you are, what your fears are, what your blind spots are. And it just informs your life and your leadership. And like I said, it's not a box that we put ourselves in, but it helps us to understand our default mechanisms and how we can overcome those to be the best version of ourselves.
You write about turning pain into purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what that transformation looks like for our educators and our school leaders when they're in the midst of it.
Yeah. I had a conversation the other day. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about the masks that we wear through life. Oftentimes when you, let's say, use a school, for instance, you go into a school and we're doing important work. we're educating our youth. And each person in that organization has a story. There's a book called Theo on Golden, and he says in that book, every face has a story and every story has a face. And with those stories, we have a lot of baggage that we carry, some more than others. For me, my story started when I was 15 years old. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and my two younger brothers went on a horseback ride. Only one brother came home. We looked for him. That was prom night for me, my first prom. The next day was Mother's Day, and we didn't find him until Monday afternoon. That's why I went into education, because our school community showed up for us. And then after that, I talked to you already about my mom's, her battle with cancer. And then my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he has recently passed away. Everybody has that baggage that we're carrying, and hurting people hurt people. And so when we look at our stories, we can choose to take that hurt and turn it into purpose, take that pain and turn it into purpose. Because if we don't do that, I'm not fearful, but concerned that the opposite can be true. That pain can make you bitter and can make you lash out at other people, and it may make it hard for you to love people. And at the core of what we do in education is the people. It's the people, not the programs, that make our schools great. And so we have to find a way to turn that pain into purpose. And that's why I went into education. And, years later, that's why now I'm starting this business and working with people in a different capacity, because we all have a purpose in this life. We can use that purpose to help others reach their full potential.
Yeah, it's so true. All right. I want to talk about hopefulness.
Mm-hmm.
Many of our leaders want to be hopeful.
Yeah.
But they may be in a really difficult season, especially in the spring, as we're talking.
Yes.
It is insane on the campus and at the district level. So what are some actionable strategies from Lead with Hope that our listeners can implement right away to hopefully build that hope back up?
Yeah. In my book, I talk a lot about building a system of self-efficacy, because I believe that change starts internally. It starts on the inside. And so the first thing that I would encourage leaders to do is practice the pause. We are rushing through our life. We are counting down the days. We are looking forward to that next achievement or date or activity. Practice the pause. Give yourself some time and space in your calendar to really reflect and cultivate that self-awareness that we talked about earlier. That's the first thing, pause. The second thing is, in your relationships with other people, in your interactions with other people, be present. And I learned this the hard way. In the superintendency, there were a million tasks that I was doing every single day. And I often would slam my calendar full of as many things as I could do in the day. And when you do that, you don't give enough margin to be present with the people that God has placed in your life. And I think that being present and enjoying that journey is why we're here in the first place. So we have to pause, we have to be present. And the third one is, as I said, enjoy the journey. A type 3 achiever, I struggled with that. But I'm learning to do that better and better every day on this journey of becoming. Yesterday, my daughter texted me in the middle of the day. She said, "Hey, Mom, let's go get lunch today." My calendar was full, but you know what? I have learned to create the margins so that I can do that occasionally, and I can enjoy the journey as I'm doing the important work of helping to grow people.
So you talked about systems, and obviously our educational leaders who are feeling overwhelmed or they're feeling discouraged. Were there any life hacks that you put in place as far as systematically that helped you with that feeling and hopefully reconnecting, building hope, all the things that you're talking about?
Yeah. I talk about my calendar a lot, because everything that I do, it starts and ends with my calendar. But one of the things that I did to create those margins is I create calendar wedges. Instead of having a 10 o'clock meeting and then an 11 o'clock meeting and then a 12 o'clock meeting, I create margins, maybe 15 minutes spaces in between the calendar appointments so that you can breathe. You can be present when you go into that next meeting. It's just simple things like that. The other thing that I religiously do every single day is at the very beginning of my day, I set at least 30 minutes to connect with what I value most. That's my faith in my life. I get up and I read the Bible. I have my first cup of coffee and I have 30 minutes. Absolutely. That is a non-negotiable. That time in the morning to connect with what I value and to have some me time to set an intention for my day is incredibly important. And it just helps me to feel more grounded as I go into the day. And Josh, I've struggled my whole life because in the book, I talk about the importance of habits being mind, body, and spirit. We got to think about the whole person. Mind has always come easy because I love to learn. I'm always reading or listening to a podcast or taking a course. That's always come easy. The faith part, that's been pretty easy for me as well, because it's that grounding. It's that setting the intention at the beginning of the day. But the one I struggle with is the body, the exercise, the movement. And it is equally important. And I had the mindset, like I said before, everything starts in the mind. I had the mindset that if I didn't have 30 to 60 minutes every single day, I shouldn't do it at all, right? It was either all or none thinking for me. But what I have learned is that even if you have 5 or 10 minutes, get up and move. Maybe those calendar wedges, you have 15 minutes, walk around the school, go out to the track, get some fresh air. It doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes or 50 minutes, do something every day. Because if you're moving your body, if you're cultivating that mind, body, and spirit, you are going to show up better for other people for sure, but you're also going to show up better for yourself. And when you are taking care of you, you're not pouring from an empty cup. You're not short and irritable and, quickly frustrated. Your blind spots, your triggers, you're more aware of those things, and you're showing up as the person that you want to be.
Oh, I love it. All right, let's talk about some exciting news, Brandi. So you've got a new children's book, and I know you also have a brand new cover where it's a hard copy, which you have in hand, which is awesome.
Sure. Yes.
So I'd love for you to share about Spreading Sunshine with Kindness, why you created this resource, this children's book, and what people can expect when they grab it.
Yeah. So 3 years ago, I had my first 2 grandsons 6 months apart. My daughter Morgan had my first grandson, and then 6 months later, my son Ryan and his wife had their first child. And when Rhett was born, I remember sitting on the couch. We were, getting ready to go visit them, and my heart was just full. It was overflowing with joy. And to give some context, Josh, like I said before, there's been so much grief in my life, losing a sibling, losing both of my parents. It's been hard. And so to have that joy to overflowing, I had to do something with all that emotion. And so I have recently fallen in love with writing, and I started writing this book, and I started imagining what the world would be like when these boys grow up, what these boys were going to be like when they grew up. And one thing led to the other, and it ended up being a book about how they go out into the world and they spread sunshine with kindness. It starts at Nana and Pa's house. They call us Nana and Pa, me and my husband. And it starts here, and they do small little acts of kindness with us. And then they start dreaming about what they can do to help other people. And then they help a friend who's in a wheelchair. They help a friend whose parents got divorced. They help a custodian, and so on and so forth. And I think that leadership starts with kindness. I think that as leaders and as human beings, we all have that choice, and everybody can be kind. And so I want to cultivate that in young hearts and older hearts so that we can be reminded that kindness is a choice and we can always do something that is kind each and every day. And fun fact, if we engage in random acts of kindness, it's also good for our mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, it's that ripple effect.
Yep.
So with this book, you also have where you're booking author visits and assemblies for the upcoming year, fall 2026. So if folks are interested in that, where can they find that information?
Yeah. If they head over to sparkhopeedu.com/spreading sunshine with kindness, they are going to find that information. They can also go to my website, sparkhopeedu.com, and there is a schedule with Brandi button. And I would love to partner with you and just to talk about how we can bring a kindness adventure to your school or your district. There's a lot of opportunity here to spread sunshine, to be the change that we want to see, and to help our students to make these kind choices.
Yeah, that's exciting. All right. So another project you got coming up here is a community that you're building for 2026 that's specific for female leaders. And I'd love for you to share out this exciting news.
Yeah. So in January of 26, I started Spark Hope Community. And this community was built with female leaders in mind, because while leadership is hard across the board, as females, I wanted to create a space where we could have real conversations and build connection, where we could share practical tools that spark change. It's a community where people of faith can come and they can share encouragement. You don't have to be a person of faith, but if you are a person of faith, you're going to get that encouragement in this space. And it's just a community where we can learn and we can grow and we can support one another together. I do a monthly mastermind, and I love hosting our guest speakers. This year so far, we have had Bethany Rees. She has a podcast, Leadership on the Rocks, and a book that also goes along with that. We have had Casey Watts. She's our clarity queen, and she has talked to us about clarity. We had Amy P. Kelly. She shared with us about difficult conversations. And then we had Carmen Murray talk about intentional leadership. Our next mastermind is May 6th, and we're going to have Rachel D. Baker, and she's going to talk to us about intentional leadership and creating space to breathe.
Awesome. So if someone's listening right now and they want to jump into this free community for this year, where would they go?
Yeah, there's a link that I can share with you, Josh, and we can put it in the show notes, but it's Spark Hope Community, and it's just sparkhopeedu.com/Dr. Brandi Kelly -4049.
Perfect. So we'll make sure that's in the show notes. We're going to have a bunch of resources for you during this episode because Brandi is doing so many fantastic things. So we'll have her book, Lead with Hope. We'll also have the children's book link. And then, of course, we'll have, these various links that we're talking about throughout the episode in the show notes for you. Also, it'll be on joshtamper.com. So we're going to make it super simple for you not only to connect with Brandi, but to grab all of these resources and be a part of this wonderful community. So with that, Brandi, let's share out some recommendations, right? So this is a question I ask all my guests. And so it's great that they're listening, but I want them to have an actionable item after this episode. And so if there's something our aspiring or current leaders can do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
Yeah. I talked about in this episode the fact that everything starts in the mind. And so when I coach leaders, what I encourage them to do is a thought audit, because sometimes we have limiting beliefs. We have imposter syndrome. We have doubts, we have fears. And so if we take some time and we do a thought audit, we can name it, to tame it, and then reframe it. And this thought audit, basically, you just write down your thought. What is the difficult thought that I'm wrestling with right now? For some leaders, and I talk about this in my book, my first principal job, I struggled with imposter syndrome. I was leading the school community where I went to school as a child. That imposter syndrome is a real thing. So name that thought. And then you have to separate your thoughts that are fact and your thoughts that are a story that you're telling yourself. Sometimes we lie to ourselves. I hate to say that, but it is true. Sometimes we lie to ourselves, and we have to separate fact from story. And then we need to reframe it, and reframe it with compassion. Because when we think about the way that we speak to ourselves, our internal dialogue, we would not talk to our friends that way. We would not talk to a stranger on the street that way. But we are very critical of ourselves oftentimes. So we have to reframe it with compassion. And then if you follow me, you will notice that I say hope without action is just wishful thinking. So to put this into practice, we have to choose an action. What is the next step you're going to take? So you name your thought, you tame your thought, you reframe your thought, and then you commit to an action. And I have a reflection sheet that will walk our listeners through this. It's a very practical strategy that anybody can do. And they can integrate it into maybe a time of self-reflection that they already have. But if they don't, I would encourage them to start here and to start reflecting with this tool.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait for folks to grab this free resource. So we'll, of course, link it and make sure that everyone has an option to grab this, because I think you're right. I think I was thinking about my own journey, and plenty of times that I was not honest with myself or beat myself up over something that, again, I would have given a colleague so much more grace on. But for myself, I really, hit myself pretty hard on that one. So I think this is a great idea as far as reflection, similar to what you were talking about before. So Brandi, I would love for folks to connect with you. I've been flashing your website up as we've been talking, but for our podcast listeners, if you wouldn't mind sharing out your website, and then of course, how they can connect with you on social media.
Yeah. I'm on most social media platforms, but if you go over to my website at sparkhopeedu.com, you are going to find several different pages, and on those pages are all of my social media platforms. I'm Brandi Nash Kelly on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and those are the two that I am most active on. But I am also on Instagram, and it's Hope Fueled Leaders on Instagram. So I would love to connect with the listeners and to just share some strategies to lead with hope and to stop surviving in life, right? To start thriving and really build a life that you love.
Yeah. All right. I want everyone to make sure that you are connecting with Brandi as soon as possible, because she is extremely genuine and she is walking the walk. I know some folks can say wonderful things, but Brandi is actually living it and has great resources and tools for all of our leaders who are struggling right now. So I want to make sure that everyone's jumping into the show notes, clicking on those links, grabbing her resources, and definitely for our female leaders being a part of this wonderful community of support. So Brandi, with that, I just wanted to thank you for just being the person that you are. You're so caring, you're so giving, and you talk about kindness, you are living it. And with that, my friend, I'm just so appreciative of your time and for you being a wonderful guest on Inspired to Lead.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate you having me, and I'm grateful that we were able to connect first online and then in person at North Carolina. So thanks for having me on the show today.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.